Well, I don't think we would have fit everybody here in the library where we where they kicked us out about 10 years ago because we got too big. Um, and I just want to mention some programming items. In particular, there's one this Sunday morning. I met the Sane family at a birding event about a year ago and was really impressed with Pat, Rod, and Eric Sane with their knowledge and enthusiasm for birding and nature in general. And I tried reaching out to see if they could, I discovered they were living basically around Ferndale, so I've been trying to get them to lead, offer a hike of some sort, some kind of a field trip on the peninsula somewhere. And but so often they were away, they were off traveling, and I was trying to get snowshoeing because they said snowshoeing in the winter, but they weren't here. They went somewhere else. But finally, we were able to this fall arrange something for Sunday morning. That's this weekend, starting at the mouth of the Sauble River at 7 and going to as late as 12 or 1 with some pot of chili and some nourishment at their house in the Ferndale area. And you can go for just a few hours if you like, but we really want to get some people signed up for that. Eric is a really hot rod birder that is really keen to see about finding some Nelson sparrows there and a lot of other wildlife and shorebirds along the coast there. Basically, the Huron shore from Sauble River all the way up to the Ferndale area. So please sign up for that if you can spare a few moments and go and meet this family. They're just wonderful people, and we'd like to get more events offered on the peninsula and also even down in southern Bruce County um, to uh, to complement what we get elsewhere. And I also would like to especially welcome some guests that are here people that are here that I've never seen at one of these meetings before. And on a couple of them, it reminded me that the reason I came to my first field naturalist meeting was the running connection. Having been involved with a running background, and the speaker was Graham Magor, who was based then in the Markdale area and was a super triathlete, and he still held the record for the Slough of Despond 50K. Anyway, he was the speaker, and I came to that meeting, and I thought, I think I'd like this group, and I kept coming back. Anyway, tonight, welcome Trevor Stokes and Emma Shea and Dave Swieger. Dave's from Markdale. I was in high school with him, and also a champion runner. These guys are fabulous. And and so anyway, I just wanted to welcome everybody to this. And I believe there are close to 200 people on Zoom at home. So welcome to you as well. Okay. I thought you said 158 2 hours ago. All right, that's great. So anyway, I thought it was time that we look at having an update on the black bear population on the peninsula. And about 10 years ago, we had Jody Shifley give a wonderful presentation, and I still remember the theme of that. But I reached out to Willie, and he said, you know, Martyn Obbard is retired now, and he would give a wonderful talk. And so I spent the last 2 or 3 years just kind of trying to connect the dots and see if we can find a way to get Martyn over here. And tonight is the night. And Martyn was able to travel today and be here with us tonight. And it's he's he knows, well, it's like trombone players. They all know each other. That um, I've got through this club, I've met people that are wildlife biologists, and find out I even went to high school with Ted Armstrong was in Markdale with us, and he was a wildlife biologist in the Thunder Bay area, and we had him as a speaker here. So there are a lot of connections like that, and so just like Ted and like Brent Patterson, who'll be coming in the spring to talk about the moose. These wildlife biologists, they cover a lot of territory in their training. And I've been talking to Stefan Menu for a few years about doing a talk on the snow geese, because that's what he did his PhD on. And I saw a picture just the other day of the snow geese migration in Quebec, and it was just amazing. I thought, whoever's taking over programming, that's something you might want to look into. But Martyn also studied snow geese and polar bears, and it's just amazing all the different wildlife specialties they incorporate into their careers. And so I'm very happy to finally and present to you Martyn Obbard to talk about the black bears on the Saugeen Bruce Peninsula this evening. Thanks.
Well, thanks, John. It's feeling a little bit like Old Home Week. Willie, of course, I know. Willie came out several winters, I think, doing sort of photographic documentation of the black bear study we did on the Bruce. And a biologist who worked with me in the 90s did her PhD on my black bear project in Chapleau. She and her daughter showed up right at the beginning, and we haven't seen each other in, I don't know, Anita, 15 years maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry on your behalf that you're losing John, because I can tell you he is persistent. He first contacted me more than 3 years ago, and I said, John, I've retired, and I'm kind of not doing these talks anymore. And he said, well, come on. Well, then I got sick, and then I said, I have to cancel. We'd had tentative date, and I said, look, I have to cancel. And all the time I was ill and recovering, he would contact me every once in a while and say, I'm just wondering how you're doing. Are you still alive? Have you recovered enough to give a talk? And finally, last year, we settled on a date, and so here I am. And when I agreed to do this, I said, so I'll focus on the work that the students did that working on this talk. So you may find it a bit text heavy. I also was telling Brian I had trouble with PowerPoint the other day, and it was messing up all of the, how you have bullet points, you want them to come in one at a time so people aren't overwhelmed. I had to remove all of those because PowerPoint was really messing up, and I wasn't seeing all those. But anyway, that's just a heads up. I think we're good to go. So this cover slide, this is a young yearling bear whose name was Storm. And the student who did most of the sort of field work on this in the summers and so on, named all of the adult females, named them all. I was old fashioned, just want to number them. She said, no, that's not, we got to be more like Jane Goodall. And so we will name all our females. So Storm's mother was Sheila. And so her sons were Storm and forget the name of his brother. But anyway, this is Storm. So this will be about black bears on the Saugeen. And the other reason I'm feeling old is that this study actually ended almost 20 years ago. And but anyway, some of you may not have heard any of this before, so we'll get going. We're having an issue here already, Brian. Well, we'll go this way. All right, so a bit of background. So the origin of the study actually goes back to 1997, the late 90s, when Parks Canada staff at the time and also RM&R staff were concerned about the bears on the Bruce. They figured that possibly the bears on the Bruce were isolated, given all the development that there is around the bottom end of Georgian Bay. And speaking of shock, I haven't been up here at least 10 years and maybe 15. I could not believe the development in Collingwood. And if 30 years ago we thought bears weren't going to make it through there, they sure as hell aren't going to make it now. But anyway, that was one of the original questions. There's also issues. Look, it's a pretty small area. Maybe there's not many bears there. How are they surviving? We've got habitat fragmentation. We've got human-bear conflict going on. Bears at people's cottages, bears at houses, and so on. And there is ongoing harvest, and we know there are problem bear kills. So those are all the concerns that people had in the 90s. And you don't need to be shown this, but the Bruce is a pretty small area, this upper Bruce ecosystem, and relative to the rest of Ontario. So why are there bears here? Well, we've got lots of natural area. We have large interspersed wetlands. We've obviously got a lot of deciduous forest, which is pretty good for bears. And so they're pretty good reasons. And of course, historically, going back far enough, there would have been bears everywhere in Ontario. We've got issues about habitat loss due to agriculture, but also due to development and increased urbanization. And so those are all of the concerns that we might have had. So the background for the study, or our original agreement that I developed with Parks Canada people, was for a 3-year study that we would start in 1998 and would run for 3 years. We had manager support at the time from Mike Briggs of Parks Canada and Chris Davies, my old manager. So we began fieldwork in 1998. One of my summer students that year had been on the Chapleau project for several years, was named Alistair McKenzie. Had a lot of faith in Alistair, so I sent Alistair down, and he started the project here on the Bruce. We had Trevor Robinson and I were co-PIs then at the time. So Al had a lot of trouble getting started kind of late in the summer. He caught a few bears. He did manage to get one female collared that year. Rhonda was our original bear. And then we had a lot greater effort beginning in 1999, led by Scott Sutton with Parks Canada. So in that first year, he had a bunch of years. Then we had greater effort beginning for 2000. That went all the way through the winter of 2006, when we removed all of the collars. So we had several objectives. We wanted to determine the number of bears that were there on the Bruce. Is that a small enough population to be worried about? We wanted to determine the degree of genetic isolation through DNA microsatellite typing. We wanted to look at dispersal patterns of radio-collared young bears. And then lastly, we wanted to determine what habitat use patterns there were for radio-collared bears, and with an emphasis on the major seasonal food sources, and also what were they using in the winter for denning. So Parks Canada led that major capture work beginning in 1999. My role was to find funding for and bring on grad students as appropriate. I led the winter handling, including funding the helicopter time that was needed. Can you hear me okay at the back? Stand closer to the mic. Okay. Somebody should have said something 5 minutes ago. All right. So we had a pretty small project, actually, in terms of funding, but we did a lot of sharing of resources and staff at the time. So we live trap bears in what are called barrel traps, just 2 1/3 45-gallon drums welded together, a bunch of holes cut in the side for ventilation, but also to allow it access so that we can drug the bears. There's a guillotine door at the front. When the bear crawls in and pulls on a bait at the far end of the trap, the guillotine door drops down and the bear is captured. So this is where we set up those trap locations originally. We had them roughly between 2 and 3 kilometers apart, because the average home range of an adult female bear is about 2.5 kilometers in radius. So if they were overlapping, then presumably you had multiple chances to catch a bear. So if you know the north end of the Bruce Atoll, you know it's a pretty tough area to find areas where you can safely put out traps and catch bears. But we did a pretty good job. We got pretty good distribution. Occasionally, let me back up one. You see we had a couple of traps quite far south, almost as far south as Lion's Head. And those were bears that were conflict bears. So they were coming into somebody's property or whatever. So we specifically targeted trying to trap bears like that as well. And we used the M&R's bear trap for that kind of work. So usual stuff. We applied ear tags. They all got numbers as well as names. This is my grad student, Melissa, on the left with her summer student. She's fitting a radio collar in one of the adult bears. In those days, it was fairly old-fashioned work. It was VHF telemetry. So The students had to go out and radio track bears from the ground, locate them by triangulation. So get 3 or 4 bearings from a bear, and where they overlap, that was your best location, best estimate of location for that bear. We also, once a month, did aerial telemetry, because there's sometimes bears just get out of the range of truck-mounted or hand-mounted antenna, or they were in remote areas that it was really impossible to get at them except by flying over. So this slide just shows how we ramped up in the first few years of the study. So, with that first bear that Al caught in 98, he caught it fairly late August, so there's only about 5 locations before it actually went into its den. But then by 99, we had more bears collared, and then you can see how it ramped up. So by 2001, and then through the rest of the study, we had, roughly 2 to 3 or 400 locations in any one year that gave us pretty good confidence that we knew where the bears were. And as some of the early work, these are different home ranges of different bears. So you can see here's all the different bears here. Here's Sheila, who's with Storm's mom. And you can see here's Sheila's home range here, and there was Storm, somewhat overlapped. Maybe I just need to stand closer. I'm sorry. I tend to walk around. I'm more used to a lapel mic. I can kind of wander around, so I'll try not to do that. Just a little bit of information on if you don't really have much of an idea what a bear weighs. Males are about 64 kilos, maximum sort of 300 pounds in the summer, can be 500 pounds by the time they go into the den. Females are smaller, can be as light as 60 kilos, 130, 140 pounds in the summer, can be 200 when they go into the den. And cubs are pretty small. They're less than 2 kilos when they're about 6 to 8 weeks old in March. So one of the questions we had was, how many bears are there? So we were trying to determine that with live trapping, but that's hard to do. You have to have lots of captures, and it was tough to cover that area. So in the mid-90s, I'd started using a technique that had actually been developed in BC and Alberta for monitoring grizzly and black bear populations. And the idea was that if you set up this strand of barbed wire in a corral, you can see the barbed wire here, it goes around these trees. You have an attractant in the middle, which would be cans of sardines. And the idea is it attracts the bears in. It either ducks under the barbed wire or steps over it. And either way, you hope it leaves a tuft of hair behind. So we were going to do this approach to get an estimate of the number of bears on the peninsula. And so you're hoping that you've got a hair sample like that left behind, extract the DNA from that hair sample. That gives you individual identification of that animal. I mean, it's a pretty common technique these days. Back in the early 90s, when Anita was working on our black bear project, it was new, brand new. In fact, in those days, we couldn't get DNA. We didn't know how to get DNA out of hair like this. We had to have either muscle sample or blood to get. But these days, a few hairs and you've got people. And of course, you all have heard all kinds of stories of the police identifying people who murdered somebody 30 years ago out of a DNA sample. Anyway, so we're trying to mimic where we had set out the live traps. So we set our barbed wire hair corrals in all these different places here. And out of that, we got our very first estimate of the number of bears on the Bruce Peninsula, at least in the north end, largely within the park. And that estimate said for the upper Bruce, we thought there was 53 bears there. And that is in a Parks Canada report that was published in 2001. So that was our first estimate. And we thought, well, that's not many bears. So we kept going with that. The next thing approach I took was I brought on a student named Eric Howe, who was quite mathematical, quite analytical, and asked him to conduct what was called a population viability analysis. So it's a way of looking at how long you think a population can persist and what kinds of things could you do to ensure that it persisted. So Eric made a bunch of assumptions about the area of the Bruce, where bears might be expected, about the density and birth and death rates, etc. And we used information from a study that had been done in the 70s and 80s in kind of similar habitat near North Bay, at least the same climate and fairly similar habitat. And so what Eric did was, using PVA, he estimated the probability of extirpation on the entire peninsula and also on the north end, based on a whole bunch of different management actions. Well, what did he find? He found the most effective ways to reduce extirpation risk were: 1, conserve habitat outside of the national park; 2, reduce incidental mortality. So that's mortality from things like roadkill or from human-bear conflict, where a bear is shot when it's getting into somebody's garbage or whatever. The third was to reduce overall harvest on the peninsula. And the fourth would be to reduce the proportion of adult females in the harvest. So that's what Eric found from his PVA. And we published that in the Journal of Wildlife Management in 2007. By the way, I've told John that I'll send him all the PDFs for all of these papers that we've published. And if anybody's interested, you can just ask John, and he'll have copies. At least he'll have a PDF. So what the PVA suggested was that if the population was reduced only to the park, that there was a very high probability, almost 100%, that population would be extirpated within 50 years. The probability of extirpation was pretty high, even for the rest of the Bruce, more than half that it would be extirpated if the harvest remained high. You can reduce the probability of that by having a strong male bias in the harvest, i.e. protecting females, or reducing the problem bear kills, etc. So at the same time, I had a student working on some of the DNA work. And Karen Mills finished her master's in 2005. She had DNA from these from live trap bears, but also from these barbed wire hair traps. And she sampled the profiles at 15 microsatellite loci. She detected 70 individuals on the Bruce, compared those to samples from about 400 animals from elsewhere in Ontario, right widespread across Ontario, actually. And what she found was that Bruce bears were genetically distinct from the rest of Ontario. They also had a low level of heterozygosity, suggesting one suggestion was possibly inbreeding. And that would come from being a very small population size. So again, that raised concerns. We had this suggestion that maybe there weren't very many bears. We had a suggestion that they could be extirpated within 50 years maybe. And we had this suggestion that they were genetically distinct. So we had the suggestion from Eric's work that one of the best things you could do is protect habitat outside the Bruce Park. So, well, what is that habitat? So Melissa Cody was the student who studied that. And so we had intensive radio monitoring of all of our radio-collared bears. So we had locations where those bears were. We could overlap those locations with satellite imagery of the habitat types. And Melissa did a ton of work. Was mind-boggling, actually, how much ground truthing she did to actually walk into all of those locations and say, okay, the satellite imagery says it's this kind of habitat type. Well, what is it actually? And yes, it is, or it isn't, whatever. So what she found within the whole Bruce itself, where females decided to set up their home range, they selected dense mixed forest. Subadults and yearlings specifically selected dense deciduous forest. Within their home range, so a female has chosen a dense forest, but there could be dense coniferous, there could be dense deciduous, there could be dense mixed, etc., or there could be other kinds in there. What she found was that they selected dense mixed forest in the spring and summer and dense deciduous in the fall. If you know what bears feed on in the fall, of course, that makes sense because they're looking for oak and beech. And anyway, I won't go through all of that. It's pretty complicated. But you can see, this is a satellite imagery, and the really dark green is dense coniferous stands, which I'm sure you know are more common on the west side of the peninsula. The dense mixed and dense deciduous are more common on the east side of the peninsula. But there's tons, at least there was at the time, tons of dense forest stand on the peninsula. The next thing that Melissa looked at was this question about, well, where are they denning in the winter? So we had 31 den visits, or bears that we visited in their dens. 81% of them were in rock crevices. You'll see pictures of those in a minute. So this blew my mind, because this is completely different from anywhere else I had worked in Ontario. So these are crevices in the pavement of the Niagara Escarpment. They're cracks that might be only a foot wide, 30 centimeters wide, but went down maybe 2 or 3 meters. And then the bottom of this would be what looked like, for all the world, as if the bear had scraped out a big cavern in the limestone. But of course, it's the result of, post-glaciation melt, of meltwater action getting down these cracks, and then, it's action creating these little caverns down in there that the bears were down in. So 81% like that. 3 of them were actually excavated, so dug into a sandbank or something. 2 were under brush piles, and 1 was on a very large boulder on the talus slope on the east side of the escarpment. So 43% were in dense mixed stands, 40% were in dense coniferous, and 13% were in dense deciduous. So again, speaking to the importance of dense forest stands for these bears, not only for their summer and fall, spring, summer, and fall habitat requirements, but for denning as well. And I'm not sure that this shows up very well here. You can see some of the locations. We had some dens here fairly far south of Miller Lake, and others and all the way up here. Anyway, they were widespread, including in coniferous stands. So a little bit about the winter den work. So this is Scott Sutton on the right, and me, and we're having a look at the map where we've got all of our den locations plotted, and we're getting set to what's our strategy going to be, who are we going to do on what days, and what makes sense, etc. And in the background, I'm in our helicopter. We're ready. This is the crew on the last year, 2006, when we removed all of the collars. I'm sure you know some of these people. So Tom Buckley, who is a Parks Canada warden here. Frank Burrows, who is a Parks Canada biologist itself. This is Doug Holtby, our MNR pilot. Derek Potter, who worked with me for several years. That's me. Jeff Schlosser, Alex Mills, Melissa Cody, the grad student, and Jody Shifley, who I'm sure some of you know. And Jody and Alex and Jeff were all from the MNR district. So this is what a bear den in a crevice in the Bruce Peninsula looks like. That's a vertical entrance dropping down. I don't remember the details of this particular den, but it looks like it was one that probably went down 2 or 3 meters. And you can see, I think, that's a fairly narrow crack like this. And some of these, I was a lot younger in those days and more flexible. And some of these dens, I would have to go down in them to drug the bear, of course. And you don't know what you're getting into. You know what you can see. And anyway, occasionally they would have to put a harness on me because I could slither down. But when I tried to come back up, I had trouble getting up, and they'd have to haul me out by the harness. But anyway, fortunately, black bears are generally fairly fairly calm in the den, I guess, most of them. And so I never really had any issues. A lot of these photos were taken by Willie, by the way. So thank you, Willie. And this one we actually used in the paper that we published on this. This is Scott Sutton looking down into a den to see if he can see what's going on. So there's a story about this photo. So the fellow who's down in the den is a fellow named Wayne Lintak, which some of you may know. He was a conservation officer here for a few years. And Wayne had worked on the original black bear study in the 70s and 80s in near North Bay. And when I found out that Wayne was a CO here, I asked him if he'd want to come in on the project, and he jumped at the chance because he loved it. So anyway, I had drugged the bear. And again, I don't remember the exact details of this, but I think Wayne is down there checking to see if the bear's out and ready to be handled, and also maybe getting the cubs and maybe going to pass the cubs up. So when you're down in there, it's really hard to slither back up. So you need people to be on your, to have hold of your ankles so they can pull you out. But if you notice the fatal flaw here, what they've actually got hold of is Wayne's rain pants. So imagine there's Wayne down in there and he says, okay, pull me out, or bangs his heels together or something. And the two fellas haul mightily on his rain pants. And also Wayne, as it turned out, pants and rain pants and pants, of course, down to his ankles. And Wayne comes up and he's all flustered and whatever, and turns around, and my 3 female grad students are standing facing him. So poor Wayne, he was embarrassed, and they saw more than they ever wanted to. So I mentioned there was this one den that was under a huge boulder on the talus slope of the eastern side of the peninsula, and this is was amazing to me. So there's Doug. Now Doug's about 5'8". So this area here is like about 3 or 4 meters across. The bear's bed is here. It's more than 2 meters wide of leaves and other forest duff that the bear has carried in there and then piled up into a bed and so on. So anyway, it was pretty amazing to see. So a few more shots of us doing some of the winter work. That's the fellow in the left there is Ron Williams, who was also with the park for a few years and came out in the study several years. Frank Burrows and Derek weighing a bear. And there's me with a little cub. You can see its eyes are just barely open. So it's about 8 weeks old. That's Melissa and me in our blue phase with a couple of cubs, trying to keep them warm. So this may be a little disorienting. This is a female in a den with a couple of yearlings. And so we've handled them all. We've given them reversal. We put them back in the den. We give them all their reversal drugs. And so this is mom's ear here. This is mom's snout. This is a yearling that we've put in up against the back of mom's head. And the second yearling is back here in the den. So just to show you that when we put them in there, we tried to bundle them up all close together so they can, stay warm against mom's body heat. So that was some of our winter work, and I already shared the results. So John asked me if since I had finished the field work there, had we done any more work? And I mentioned that we did that first barbed wire hair trap estimate in 2001, where we thought there was 57 bears in the north end. And we had repeated that with Parks Canada 2 or 3 times. And then we still weren't getting what we were confident in as an answer to the number of bears. So in 2012, we worked with the district and with ourselves, the research folks, and with Parks Canada. And we tried to sample as much as we could of the entire peninsula. So we set up these 90 of these barbed wire hair corrals, sampled in 5 occasions. We detected 71 unique individuals. And from that, we estimated that there were 316 bears with a confidence interval of 225 to 408 on the entire Bruce Peninsula, and that there were 97 within the park and its interspersed lands there. And published that in 2016. So that's work has been repeated, I think, a couple of times since or at least once since I retired, and the results haven't been published yet. So just to show you somewhere, you can see we had even southwest of Wyerton, and I forget what this area is called, but we had traps down in there, barbed wire corrals, and you can see we had them all the way up the Bruce, trying to get a good estimate for the entire Bruce. So the last student I had working on the project was Agnès Pelletier. She did her PhD at Trent, finished in 2013. She looked at DNA of black bears from a hole across the province. And again, she found that they were, on the Bruce, were distinct from bears elsewhere in the province, which confirmed what Karen Mills had suggested in 2005, but with a lot more samples. So then Agnes did something in addition. She looked at the mitochondrial DNA, and that's, you may know, that's transmitted by females. So the egg of mammals has a lot of mitochondria in it. The sperm of mammals has very few mitochondria, and they're only in the tail. So the chances of them actually getting into the egg are pretty slim. So mitochondria generally are transmitted by females. If you've done any of your own family history stuff and maybe submitted your DNA to Ancestry and whatever, when you get your report back and they talk about the haplotypes and so on, and you know which haplotype you came from, that's what they're getting at. It's same thing in humans. So Agnes found that there were 36 haplotypes from samples all across the province, but only 2 on the Bruce Peninsula. Now, they weren't unique because those 2 were found elsewhere in the province. But because there were only 2, and lots of areas of the province had 16, 18, 20 different haplotypes in a fairly small area, that suggested there might have been a bottleneck in the past. So Agnes looked at a whole bunch of scenarios to try and explain the low genetic diversity on the Bruce. And her general conclusion was that conservation concerns for the bears were warranted because there seems to have been a recent demographic bottleneck, and that was associated probably with reduced migration onto the Bruce. And then lastly, that under sustained isolation, black bears could lose a lot of their rare alleles in less than 100 years. So some conservation concerns there. So what did we discover? What we thought was the bottleneck. There have been some work published. Suffling from University of Western Ontario had published some floristic work on the Bruce, and he'd written some things in there about some big forest fires that happened in the early 1900s. I happened to find this paper from the Bruce County Historical Society yearbook, and I don't know if any of you are members, but you should dig that out. This fellow, George, I think it was George Hepburn, he actually survived that 1908 fire. He was a young boy at the time. And then in 1969, he published this story about what it was like. And these fires were pretty massive. So the 1902 one burned the north end of the peninsula. The 1908 one burned the bottom end. And, it was a combination of lightning strikes, but also, the settlers were still clearing the land, and there were burning stumps and whatever. And in a dry year, 1908, the fires got away. Anyway, these fires were so massive that they would have caused huge mortality of the wildlife, including bears, on the population on the peninsula, and so that the number of bears still that survived these fires was very few, and that's why we have only these 2 haplotypes occurring in the female population. So Agnes suggested a number of things. One was that we might consider restoring the migration corridor. Well, that's unrealistic. I mean, I just drove through Collingwood today, and not just Collingwood, but other towns along the way. So I think that's probably unrealistic. Any bears that are farther south, like in Seaforth and Stratford and so on, when we've got samples from them and we've done the DNA, those bears are from the Bruce. So these are bears that are migrating from the Bruce south, but there's no evidence of any non-Bruce bears being able to get into the Bruce, as far as I know. So what Agnes suggested was that we could maintain the current genetic diversity of bears on the Bruce if we translocated 10 bears every 5 years from outside the Bruce, maybe up near Sudbury or Penetang or some Midland, anywhere, somewhere over there, every 5 years. That's probably more practical than landscape restoration. But but unlikely as well, I think. Anyway, overall conclusions. Well, these dense mixed and dense deciduous forest stands are hugely important habitat features for spring, summer, and fall, but also winter denning. Maintaining the integrity of these forest stands is absolutely vital. I mean, you know what happens, right? People landowners sell off a lot, somebody clears it, builds a house, then we got increasing fragmentation and what have you. 80% of dens and rock crevices. This is unique to the Bruce. This paper that we published last year, I looked into the literature, and were there any other records of bears denning in these kinds of things, black bears? And there aren't. There are populations of bears where there's also karst topography like there is on the Bruce, but they tend to be denning above ground, maybe under boulders and what have you. So there doesn't seem to be this rock crevice situation that we see in this kind of pavement bedrock of the Bruce. Bears here are genetically distinct from their neighboring areas, and there's low genetic diversity. And this diversity is best explained by this bottleneck created by these huge forest fires there. Translocations could increase genetic diversity, or at least stop it from decreasing any further. But I think public acceptance could be pretty low. So this most recent abundant estimate, about 300 bears. We think about 100 in the park. Conserving habitat, the greatest effect on population persistence. It's also important to lower overall mortality. That was the second most important thing, was to try and reduce this non-natural mortality. So try to reduce bears killed in human-bear conflict. And how do we do that? Humans have to change. Bears can't. And we need to reduce road kills if we can. That's pretty hard to do unless you reduce the speed limit on Highway 6 to 50 kilometers an hour. Can you imagine what that'd be like July 1st weekend? So last comment here, that this project was a fairly small project, small budgets in any particular year. But I think it was a really good example of collaboration between Parks Canada and MNR by people who liked each other, who got along, who trusted each other, and had lots of goodwill in getting that project done. So thank you.
I think we have time for some questions. Are there any questions? Yes.
I used to work on base Gordon. It's not uncommon each summer to spot bears moving through that area. So they use it down as a corridor. Yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, we haven't detected it, but that's a... Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Person mentioned that he worked on base Borden years ago, and they would see bears passing through there from time to time. And possibly they're using that as a corridor, and they may well. To date, anyway, we haven't picked up any non-Bruce bears in the DNA work, but you know, that can be a sampling issue as well. I don't know what direction they were going. No, right. We're good.
Any other questions? Yes?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
When the slide where you listed the weights for bears, is that specific to Peninsula, or is that actually within bears in general?
It's pretty typical for a black bear female in the summer. So on their annual cycle, black bears are in their worst shape of the year around the beginning of July. They've come out of the den. You know, they're feeding on grasses and clovers and horsetails and aspen leaves and whatever. Not a whole lot of energy in it. So they have trouble maintaining the weight, and they quite often lose weight from the time they come out of the den until midsummer before the berries come on. So 60 kilos is pretty typical for a summer weight for a bear, for a female. And males, we never did catch any big males on the Bruce. I'm sure they're here. But we didn't trap any, so those male weights are for smaller, younger males. But for females, it's pretty typical. Yeah.
Just a question about the viability of translocating bears. Is with the behavior of denning and crevices be a barrier to that for bears brought in, or would that be more significant if they were bringing in females or males? Or?
Yeah. So
The question
yeah.
for the.
So the question is, in terms of translocating bears, because bears on the Bruce use these crevices mostly for denning. If you brought a bear in from outside, would that be a problem for it? Because it might not, might not know that that's where you ought to den. Good question, and I don't know. Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Yeah, a related question. Are there any current plans to try translating theirs onto Bruce?
Not that I know of. We floated the general idea before I retired, and it was not well received. Yes, ma'am.
What triggers the bear to go and seek a den?
The question is, what triggers a bear to go and seek a den? Like a lot of animals, it's a combination of things. Day length is one, right? Day length is decreasing in the fall, and that's a major trigger. The other is the availability of food. If there's still lots of natural food out in the fall, say in the boreal forest, for example, if there was lots of mountain ash in the fall, bears would stay out of their den for 2 or 3 weeks longer, feeding on mountain ash before they finally went in. But eventually, that I'm huge, I'm big and fat, and daylight, getting less. I better go den. So there's that interaction, but I think ultimately driven by day length. Yes, sir.
Do they repeat the same den over and over again?
Question is, do bears repeat the same den over and over then? On the Bruce, they didn't. In other studies, like I had a long-term study in Algonquin as well after this Bruce one, and then prior to that up in near Chapleau in the boreal forest, some bears there did reuse dens. We had one female who Anita may remember, who used the same den 4 winters in a row, and it was a bizarre den. It had an entrance tunnel that went in like this, and then there was a 90-degree turn, and the bed was back in here. So whenever you tried to go in to drug that bear, you go in and blind for one thing, and you'd get part way in, and then her paw would come out from the side, whack, 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 like this. So for 3 years in a row, we were not able to drug her. I finally, I'm thinking about, bears are smart, but I can be smart too. So I've been thinking about how am I going to get her? And I finally was able to do it. I drugged her. Next year, she used a different den.
Any other questions? Yes. back there.
Question is, how long do the young bears stay with their mom? Almost 18 months. So bears are born in Ontario, typically in the first or second week of January. Of course, they stay in the den with the mom. They come out from the den in May, say, and spend that whole summer, spring, summer, and fall with mom. They den with her in the fall again. And then that winter, then the following May, the family group, May, sometimes June, the family group splits. And at that time, the female is cycling again. She's coming into estrus again. So she chases them away, and sometimes quite aggressively. Really goes after them and chases them away. And of course, she wants them away because she's attracting males, right? She's dumping pheromones out into the environment and they attract males. And so she doesn't want big males around because pretty good evidence still of cannibalism, right? Yeah.
Do the females give birth every year?
Do the females give birth every year? Not if they're raising cubs successfully. It's every second year if they're raising cubs successfully. If they lose their cubs through accident or wolves or other bears or lynx or whatever, then they might cycle again that particular year. And so then they would actually have cubs 2 years in a row. But of course, it's because the first litter was unsuccessful. Yeah.
How long are they nursing for?
The question is, how long are they nursing for? They nurse until about July or August of that first year that they're born, and then not after that. polar bears are different, by the way. They nurse. So polar bears are born in December anyway. It doesn't matter. So they nurse until about September of that kind of first year, and then the females, they've been losing weight all the time they came off the ice, so they stop lactating. And then once the female goes back on the ice and gets in good shape again, she restarts. So I mean, it's fascinating hormonally how that happens. So anyway, it does. Brian, I don't know how we're doing for time. We have a short video that we're going to try and show you. Just some of you may have seen this years ago. But Rick Mercer